Hello, 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 and welcome back to Nothing Zilch Nada, one of the many podcasts where we have absolutely nothing in particular to talk about until we talk about it. We're your hosts, Xavier Dean,
and Jacob Green.
and this time I can actually point to him and him actually being there, or in that direction. I'm trying to get used to.
I suddenly appear.
Yeah. Yes. So this week is Jake's topic. Jake, what are we talking about today?
Well, as we have discussed over the past week after we recorded our last episode, I decided to pick a topic that I actually had since the summer, and we have the most convenient time to do it. But it's our top 10 favorite books.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of similar to our other episode that we did on top 10 favorite movies, we're going to each rank our top 10 favorite books. And we'll see how different our lists are going to be. And given the fact that like I consume more books than movies over the course of my life, I am probably going to have most likely a very different list than Xavier will.
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I read a bunch of different books for a bunch of different reasons.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, compiling this list, I think it is a 50-50 split on books that I like because I loved reading the actual stories, and books I loved because they're connected to, family or friends.
Yeah.
More family than...
Yeah, for me, it's been interesting because, like, when I was younger, I didn't care about reading, and my mom would always read to me. For various different reasons. Mostly it was for school, but over time I've grown to love reading, and I've come to see the types of books that I really enjoy. Now, much like for our top 10 favorite movies, we did set some guidelines for ourselves. So for the most part, these are novels that they're original stories that started as a book, not as a movie, not as a TV series or anything, or any type of adaptation like that. They got started as a book. And we tried our best, or at least we tried our best to keep it to one, maybe two authors per entry. Mm-hmm. For me, I got a wide variety of different authors.
Yep. And I've got 10, or all of mine are different, even though I wanted to go with the Stephen King, Richard Bachman loophole. He said no.
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind too, I know with my list I had to make an exception for it because it's kind of different, but I decided to leave short stories out of it because they're kind of different. The other thing that we talked about this briefly, but we are not talking about comic books or manga or anything of that nature. It's not that we don't like them.
In fact, I grew up on comic books.
Yeah.
That was what I first read in order to get me to read a lot of these books that are on the list.
Yeah, both of us really respect the mediums, but they're just too different from how a book is approached in order to consider it to be part of that list. Although they will get their time to shine, just not now.
Right. But before we begin, Jake, I will give you a warning. One of my books that I have on here is technically based off of a film series, but the actual book itself has nothing to do with the series other than...
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That is allowed. Because it's like, you know how Star Wars has a bunch of different stories, a lot of which, like, some of them may be based off of the films, but they're still like their own original story. You know, that's allowed.
So when we get to mine, you're actually gonna laugh. So
I hope so. Okay. Well, with that out of the way, let's get started. Xavier, why don't you go first with number 10?
Oh, I'm going first. Okay, sure. So I'm gonna start off with one of my two favorite authors, James Patterson. Growing up, he used to be an author that I would share with my grandmother on my mother's side. You know, she and I used to pass books to each other, so we'd each, read a little bit, pass it on. For this entry, I chose it specifically because out of all of the books that we've read, this is what I feel is the most distinct of his, at least that I've read. And I was looking at the list and I'm sitting here like, I need something biographical, something based on real events.
Okay.
So on my number 10 list, I have The Last Days of John Lennon by James Patterson. This book pretty much goes over the life of John Lennon from the time he met Paul McCartney to, through his time with the Beatles, marrying his first wife, having a kid, and then, them getting a divorce, him marrying Yoko Ono, him splitting off to do his own thing, him meeting different artists, like, I feel like it was John Lennon met Elton John and David Bowie.
Okay.
All the way up to his eventual demise, which was told in the viewpoint of the person who shot him. Like I said, this was one of my more distinct, one of his more distinct books that I remembered. This was one that my grandmother read first. She gave it to me afterwards to read. And I feel like I would be lying if I didn't put James Patterson at all on my list, considering he is, I'm going to make the argument, my second favorite author. So, but that is my number 10. Jake, what's yours?
Okay, so because I've read a lot of books growing up, and because I do have a lot of favorites, this was actually tricky to actually rate the books. Just for full transparency, no matter how these books are ranked, I love all of them. Like, it's really hard for me to say, because like there are certain aspects to them that make them the best for me. But I say around during 8th grade, freshman year of high school, was when we were reading more classic books constantly. And I can't remember whether this one was in 8th grade or 8th grade or freshman year of high school. But there was one book, and my mom and I, we were just talking about this yesterday, and she reminded me of it, so I had to put it on the list because I have a lot of good memories about it, and I do want to reread this book. But it is The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. So, for those that don't know about The Phantom Tollbooth, it is a children's fantasy adventure novel, and it was first published in 1961. And the plot summary of it, or at least I'll give you the foundation of what this is. So it follows this boy named Milo who thinks that everything is a bore to him. Like nothing really interests him. Nothing from school, nothing from his house, nothing about life. He just thinks everything is boring. Until there was a magic toll booth that suddenly appears. Get it? Because it's the Phantom Toll Booth. And he goes along this adventure with this dog named Talk. This dog right here is basically got the little like grandfather clock pocket watch type thing. By the way, the illustrations are made by Jules Pfeffer, and they're all over the book, just like little like pencil sketches that are just like really creative and give a little bit of imagination to the world, because they go to this world called of wisdom, and there's a lot of troubles going on. One of those being is that he has to go on a quest to rescue two of the exiled princesses, which is Rhyme and Reason. But the thing that makes the book interesting is that there are a lot of metaphorical stuff in the book about different types of stereotypes in a good way. One thing that I still remember to this day is that at one point you go to this area where you meet these creatures called the Lethargians. Mm-hmm. And they have this schedule of like, oh, we just daze around all day at 8 o'clock, and then at 12 o'clock we take our afternoon nap, and at 2 o'clock we take our mid-evening nap, and it's just so funny. But again, I plan on rereading this at some point. I also put this here on the list because this is actually a fairly quick book to go to. It shouldn't take you that long to read it. But the thing is that like, because I like when there are easy read stuff that makes you think. Because like, when you think of an easy read book, you mostly think of a kid's book, and it's like, oh, what's the point of reading this if it's easy to read? It's probably not that deep. That is not always the case. And it's tricky to do that. And Oren Juster just does it very well in The Phantom Tollbooth. It's the one book that I have here on this list, besides one other one that shouldn't take you that long to read. But there, honestly, a lot of the characters and illustrations that are in this book can be applied to our modern day society today. So, number 10, The Phantom Tollbooth. Really great book.
All right. So, moving on to number 9, I've got a book by Michael Crichton, who you may know wrote books such as Congo, or the book that became this big blockbuster hit called Jurassic Park. Yeah, he was the one who made that. The book I have is a book called The Andromeda Strain. I'm trying to remember the plot summary. Mm-hmm. Basically, there was this group of scientists who were stuck in a lab because there's this big, deadly virus that is kept in there, and they have to try to find a cure for this strain. I don't think it had a really big, body count. I do know right at the end, one of the main characters does die, trying to extinguish this strain. But in my mind, it has a really big impact on society nowadays, with a bunch of scientists trying to find different cures for different illnesses. As well, I did put Michael Crichton, however you say his name, I put him on the list because I believe this author was an author that my grandfather on my father's side got me into. Like I said, I've read Congo, I've read Jurassic Park, and then the Lost World book that he had to rush to make because they were making a Lost World movie. And then I think the other one I read was a book called Micro. But out of the 4 books that I've read, outside of this one, The Andromeda Strain is the one that I will say is my favorite from the author. So because of that, I have The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton at number 9.
Alrighty. So, I'm sure this is going to be the case for Xavier, but I have books here on this list that are going to be representing an entire series and not just one book. And this one I picked up due to my mom she was reading this series, and this was a couple years ago during my third or fourth year of undergrad. But she wanted me to take a look at this series and see what I thought about it. I was instantly hooked by the first book. And in the original series, because there are more books that come out afterwards, there's 7, and I've read all 7 of them. But it's Michael Vey by Richard Paul Evans. So, again, much like in the case of the Phantom Tollbooth, I like books that are not only easy to read, but have a deeper meaning and context, and they get you to think. And this is the same case with this book. It's not a very hard read. It is longer than the Phantom Tollbooth. At least the first book is, and the other books afterwards, because it's a continuing story. But I love the message that it brings. So, again, for all of these entries, we're trying to not spoil the stories, because we're just giving you the introductory stuff that you find in the back of every book. So basically, the story of Michael Vey is about this kid named Michael Vey, and he has these electric powers, and he also has Tourette's syndrome. Whether that's due to the electricity or just the fact that he was just like born with Tourette's syndrome, it's hard to say. But he comes off as a, this kid that gets bullied in high school. The kid's like 13 or 14, somewhere around that teenage range. But he also has to take control of his electric powers. And then he soon discovers, through some of the people that he gets in contact with, that he finds that there are other people like him that have electric powers. And the whole story explores that, as well as him trying to rescue a member of his family and finding the other electric kids. This also takes place in the United States too, but they go to other places in the world. Now, it's not the first story to attempt something where it's like, oh, the main protagonist has some kind of thing going on, and he's a weirdo, and he gets bullied, and he doesn't know how to control his powers. We've been there before.
So many times.
So many times.
Way too many times.
But
Maybe not too many times,
but what makes it interesting, 2 things. One is that every kid that has electric powers has a different use of it that's kind of clever. Like, there's one that kind of manipulates the brain. There's one, of course, you got one that can actually shoot out lightning. You got people that use heat from electricity.
I'm trying to remember who that was.
I'm trying to remember too. It's been a little bit, but
I know there are so many different unique ways. I've read those books as well. I remember there were so many unique ways they've had electricity. If I remember correctly, wasn't there someone who would drain electricity?
I think so. But the main reason I like those books, what made me interested about them, is the fact that, like, because this book is aimed towards high schoolers, although young adults and adults in general can read this too. But this is a great book for high schoolers, because what this book teaches you, and you come across this with every book, is what does it mean to make a choice? And is there a right choice to begin with?
Yes.
Because I see some stories that do this, but not as often, where it's just like, by the first book, you're given a choice. This is kind of like minor spoilers, but I'm not going to name the characters. But the main character, Michael Vey, at one point, he's at the place where he's trying to rescue someone, and he has the choice of either killing off, having this person die, or his friends, who are also captured, dying as well. And he doesn't want to make a choice.
It's a classical trolley situation.
It is, but it's way more severe, and there's no like alternate plan because he's kind of cornered. His powers are kind of taken away from him because the collars that they do. So that way he's not able to use his powers. There's nothing that he could do. He's hopeless. So he has to make a choice. And he does make a choice. I won't tell you what that choice is. Go read the book. But, yeah.
He let the dog die.
Yeah, we'll say that. But you come across that with every book series. And there are a ton of people that die in this book series.
Yes.
And very gruesome deaths, too. And even, like, straight up execution.
Yes.
But what makes it's not even just the fact that it's the consequence of choices. It's the fact that they're doing that and they're teenagers. They're kids and they're going through stuff that normally adults would go through. These kids are basically going through what should be the funnest time of your teenage years in high school, saving the world and being stressed out in the process and running and hiding.
Yep,
so
been there.
Yeah, so like, if you're interested in the series, pick up the first book, Prisoner of Cell 25, and see what you think about it. I like the book series. I think it's especially really good for teenagers that are coming to that age where they're going to have to make choices that are not easy to make, and they have to choose something.
And I was actually debating on putting the same book series in my list. It just barely got beat out. But I think the one thing I loved about the book series, well, other than it's kids with electrical powers, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this without spoiling it. I like the dynamic of the school bullies. Yeah, I do. In fact, most of the kids in general have a really good economy with each other. Like it's like they're not all buddy with each other at first. In fact, it takes a life and death situation to basically make them come together and work together and to better understand each other. Yes. Like I just love the idea of how, Michael Vey and his bully, they don't, they're not, like Jake said, buddy, but over time, they start warming up to each other. Yep. All right. So is that your number 9?
It is number 9.
All right. I guess I'll go down to number 8. Number 8, I have The Curious Case of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon.
Ooh.
It leads you to thinking that it's sort of like a detective novel where this kid finds out that his neighbor's dog got murdered, and he's trying to find out who murdered the dog, just like his normal detective novels and shows. But the book is secretly about a kid with autism coping with a family member no longer being there. Throughout the book, he and his father get into a bunch of, verbal arguments. There's a lot of disputes. The kid's not really a big fan of how his father's doing things, wants his mother. And he is told that his mother dies. I'm not going to say what happens, but I'm just going to point out the mother did not die. And again, the entire book is in the viewpoint of this kid who's trying to get through everything he can. He's trying to piece together everything that's going on, even though none of it clicks. And I think the only other big part about the story that I love, and it's really funny, the chapters are not your normal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. they go based off the Fibonacci sequence. So you've got chapter 1, chapter 2, 3, 5, 7, 7, 11, 13, 17. Jake, feel free to stop me because I don't know how far I can go in the Fibonacci sequence. But seriously, it goes through the Fibonacci sequence, and because it's in the viewpoint of the kid explains why. He explains that he'd rather go off the Fibonacci sequence because it's something different, it's something unique, and he's a big he's a big fan of math and science. Now, I would highly recommend you read this if you like the idea of looking through another person's perspective, kind of like To Kill a Mockingbird. This isn't like a To Kill a Mockingbird type book, but like how To Kill a Mockingbird teaches you need to look at things through other people's perspectives. This is sort of like that as well. Which, by the way, that book was going to be on my list as well. There were a lot of books I wanted to put on this list.
I've read To Kill a Mockingbird in high school, but I don't remember much about the book to put it on here, which is interesting because I have a couple entries that I've read when I was in grade school, and I remember more about those books. And I'll talk about why when I get to them.
You don't remember the chicken wire?
I remember the court case that happens.
Well, yeah, it's one of the most important court cases in literacy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, number 8 for me is a book series I started reading this year, actually. Again, recommendation from my mom. She recommends a lot of books to me. But this one got me hooked by the first book. And the only reason why it is so low on the list right now is because I'm only on the 3rd book. But first book, if you don't have me hooked by the first couple chapters, I'm not probably going to get reeled in super well. But this book absolutely does. In fact, this is similar to Michael Vey in a way, but it's way more flawed and way more gruesome. But it is Saga of the Forgotten Warrior by Larry Correia. This is the 3rd book that I'm currently reading. All these books have the main title being bolded. But Saga of the Forgotten Warrior is a very interesting book series. It takes place in... It's another fantasy book, but it takes place in something that looks pretty similar to a southern Middle Eastern country, India. In fact, I think it's most likely India. I could be wrong though, because there's a lot of cultural specific elements to it when it comes to the soldiers, the weaponry, the types of different countries that you come across. But it's still a fantasy novel. So there are demons in the book. There is a caste system where it's just you got the people that are part of the upper class. You got all the different warrior classes. You got the wizards, and then you got the casteless. Basically, they're the untouchables. So. Before I get a little bit further into it, let me talk about basically what the book series is about. So, there are different protagonists that you follow in this first book series, but one of the main ones that you follow is a guy named Ashtok. And he is part of this warrior class called the Protectors. They're basically elite soldiers that are just killing machines. They know how to kill super well. They also know how to utilize certain magical properties super well. What makes him a threat, though, is that he has a sword called Agruvadal. Basically, it's one of the many weapons that are made of black steel, which are some of the most dangerous weapons. What makes them dangerous is that they have to choose their wielders, and if someone touches it, they most likely either get injured by the weapon or in most cases killed. And speaking of killing, remember how I said that Michael Bay had a ton of deaths, including execution?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's basically the same case in this series, but it's way more gruesome and way more prevalent.
Man.
Like, we're not just talking about like limbs getting chopped off and heads getting chopped off. No, we're talking about like people's bodies getting exploded, like people just getting mercilessly killed on the spot, and also literal infections and diseases that can kill the body. And I already mentioned like the weapon killing too, where it's just like there's a case where like, oh, the nerves start to pump through your body and the sword just like slices you in half. It's very detailed of the gore too. So yeah, if you don't like gore, you probably won't like this book series. But here's the weird thing though. As much as the gore is prevalent, it is not as frequent as you think it is. That and the demons too, because the demons that like basically all the gore and the demons in the first book are part of like the first couple chapters, and then they take a break for a while from that. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's still some killing there and there, but like the demons actually in the first book don't come back until the end of the first book. Like they make so much of a scene that like when you see them again, you know right away that like who, because like these aren't like your typical like funny demons. These are demons that are tough to kill with normal weaponry. They also splurt out white blood, and they come out of the river because in this book series apparently water is kind of evil and no one wants to touch the water from the ocean because that's where the demons live at.
Oh, cool. Fun.
But this is a really good book series because it has a great cast of characters, a lot of which are very flawed, and yet they still have qualities to them that make them believable and real. Like, because like what I like about some fantasy novels, at least the good ones, is like, even though this is a fantasy novel, if you can make a character grounded, I'm hooked. And these characters are very grounded because, you know, with the class system that's involved in this book series, it puts a lot of things into perspectives because it's not as obvious as you would think that like, oh, the upper people are the bad guys and the people down below are the good guys. Not really. Like, of course, like, the people from the upper classes, like, they're doing malicious stuff. There's actually a lot of political stuff going on and a plan to eliminate the casteless. But there's also some underlying currents that kind of puts a whole gray area in the book. It's not black and white. And that's what also makes everything interesting for me, is that like if you can make a world that's realistic and basically morally gray, it puts a lot of thoughts into perspectives. So if you're hooked by the first book of Saga for the Forgotten Warrior, I recommend you pick up the other books. I'm absolutely enjoying it. So yeah, Saga of the Forgotten Warrior is number 8.
All right. So moving on to my number 7. And I know we said we pick a representative book. I could not pick a representative book. Are you fine with me just talking about the series?
Yeah.
All right. So, also, remember how I said you were going to laugh? So, this book series is based off Star Wars. Because you mentioned Star Wars.
Yeah.
So, I grew up on Star Wars. That was one of mine and my father's big things. You know, we watched when it first came out, or when it first re-released in theaters, we watched The Phantom Menace. We've watched all 3 movies from the sequel trilogy, as well as Rogue One and Solo in theaters. And then most recently, when Revenge of the Sith came out, because that was my father's favorite, movie, we ended up watching that.
Mm-hmm.
Because Star Wars was a big thing, we also got a lot into the books that were made because of it. Books like, there was a Boba Fett book talking about Boba Fett in between the events of Attack of the Clones and The Empire Strikes Back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keep in mind, this was made before the Clone Wars series, where Boba Fett was a semi-reoccurring character.
Mm-hmm.
But there was that. I got really into this Darth Maul book that went from, or that led up to the Phantom Menace. He and I used to read the Darth Plagueis books. And that's just the stuff before and during the Star Wars universe, not including the stuff after. But the book series I have is the Darth Bane trilogy, written by Drew, and I'm going to butcher this name, Karpyshyn. So Darth Bane is, in my opinion, one of the best Sith Lords in Star Wars, for the sole reason that he is the reason for the rule of two. He is, in my opinion, one of the stronger Sith Lords and is shown in full detail. So this is, again, a trilogy. There are 3 books. The first book focuses on him going from a slave, because, Sith Lords somehow started slaves, then being trained to be a Sith by this big Sith council, kind of like how the Jedis had their council in the prequel trilogies. And him constantly learning, constantly adapting, evolving, and then eventually going against that order, because originally there was this series of rules that they needed to follow, and the Sith decided not to do that so that they could get the upper hand on the Jedi. Now, unfortunately, I can't talk about the second book without spoiling the first, or the ending of the first book, but ending of the book, he comes back, he's like, hey, I know the best way to defeat the Jedi, here's what you do, and basically convinced all of the Sith to sacrifice themselves to end a couple of Jedi. So there's still a bunch of Jedi, but now there's only one Sith, and that's Darth Bane.
Mm-hmm.
The second book, which I think was called The Rule of Two, focuses on him getting an apprentice and then finding this little alien creature that has expanded around him to make this indestructible suit that is slowly killing him because it's a parasite. So the entire duration of the book is him running from the Jedi, trying to stay in the shadows, trying to make it so that the Jedi don't know that the Sith exist, even though they know there is still one Sith alive, at least, and him trying to counteract this indestructible suit. And then the third book goes up to his demise, which I'm using air quotes because you got to read for that. But it further exemplifies the rule of two, where there's only two there shall be, no more than less, one to embody the power, the other to crave it. Where his apprentice is starting to get an apprentice, but in order for the apprentice to have an apprentice, they have to kill their master. Now, of course, he's trying to find a way to live on past death or live forever. Overall, it is a really compelling book series. It is the one book series that I will heavily advocate needing its own movie trilogy for Star Wars. because it is such a fascinating story, and we are focusing so much on the heroes that we're not focusing enough on the lore of the villains.
I think Star Wars villain lore is interesting because I know there's a lot of stuff about Darth Plagueis that like goes outside of the movies.
Yes.
But I won't talk about it here. But like
that book was also one that I was debating on putting on the list, but I felt like double dipping with Star Wars was a bit much.
Yeah. So Disney, Sith Lord movies, make them happen.
Yes.
Not Darth Vader.
No.
He's got enough.
No, not Darth Vader. I'm fine with Sidious as long as it's him and Plagueis. We don't need another Dooku.
Or Darth Maul.
I'd be fine with a Maul prequel.
I guess so, but he's gotten a lot of stuff from like the Clone Wars series.
He does have a lot of stuff, but his life before was actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Bet you didn't know he had a lover.
Well, he's not too dissimilar to Obi-Wan. All right. Okay, so now we're getting to one of the books that I actually did not read. I experienced it through audio the first time I listened to it. This is one that my mom had me read when I was in grade school. We listened to this one in the car. There's another book that I'll be talking about later that is kind of like that. But this is a book by Christopher Paul Curtis. It's called Bud, Not Buddy.
I'm not laughing because of the book. So that was one of the last books I read, or I had my students read during my student teaching.
Oh.
So I know this book very well.
Yeah, I love this book for a lot of reasons. But so this one is more focused on like African American culture, and at least African American culture. Let's see, when did this book came out? Came out in 1999, but I want to say it's kind of like mid-30s. And they're actually, yeah, it is the mid-30s because it goes through the Great Depression era. So basically, the start of the plot of this book is that there's this kid named Bud. By the way, the reason why it's called Bud Not Buddy is because there's a lot of people that call him Buddy because, you know, Bud is short for Buddy, but his name is actually Bud. And I find this to be interesting because that's a typical jazz musician nickname or name, like Bud Powell or Bud Shank, just to name a couple of examples. But anyways, he is an orphan at the start of the book. His mother passed away, and he's a very young kid, old enough to have awareness, but still trying to get his feet on the ground. But he keeps getting adopted by new foster families, and like they just don't care for the kid. And this foster family in particular just treats him very badly, and mainly because their 12-year-old son, who is bigger and meaner, like picks fights with the kid, and Bud just keeps getting in trouble just because the kid is being an asshole. But and this is a moment from the book that I don't mind spoiling because one, it's funny, and two, it's not like a huge plot significant thing, but this is how he escapes this foster family. So he decides to escape. He finds a way to escape out of the shed that he was like trapped in, but he also wanted revenge, and he does it in the best way possible. So
he takes the shotgun.
No, he takes a pot of like hot water, but doesn't heat it all the way, because the thing that the foster family, the mom doesn't like was someone wet in the bed. So warms up the pot of hot water, gets it to about a lukewarm temperature, and then pours the water on the kid's bed, and then leaves and escapes. Like, that kid's a menace. Yeah, but he he makes the gun for it, and he's able to go out west, and he runs into a new family, and he learns some new skills from him. And from time to time, you'll encounter memories of his mother, and some of the stuff that she would say. This book is very endearing.
Yes.
It's just a very endearing book. Because I'm not a big fan of overgeneralized stereotypes, because you don't get a lot out of a character or book if you just overgeneralize a stereotype. But you give a meaning to it. You paint a very realistic picture of what it is. And again, you get me hooked on it. But this this book is just really good and very entertaining. And I like when books give you, I have a couple more books on here that give you a taste of what the history and the time period is like. It gives you a good picture of what everything goes. And I do want to reread this book at some point, because there's some stuff that I don't remember about it, but the parts of the book just really stick out to me. So yeah, Bud Not Buddy is number 7.
Yeah, and then one of my favorite parts about that book is Bud carries around with him this suitcase with all of his memories.
Yeah,
it was one of the cool things that I try to bring up in my lessons, because a lot of what that book focuses on is it focuses on, not only going and looking for your future, but keeping your past close to your heart, keeping mementos. And every time he opens a suitcase, or every time he mentions a suitcase, you can tell that is the one thing he has left of his mother. It's really heartfelt. Teachers, great book for your students to read. All right. So moving on to number 6, another series, another one that I couldn't necessarily pick one book, and it's another Disney thing. So I picked the Kingdom Keeper series by Ridley Pearson, and this one was one that my sister, my mom, and I read. It was my sister and mom started reading them, and then I started maybe a year later grabbing them from the library and reading them. The general idea of these books is you've got these 5 kids that are hired to be these, for lack of a better term, holograms in the Disney parks. I forgot what they were called, but again, they're these holograms. They can, they're at the parks, but they're, I'm trying to think of what the role for the holograms was. It was like an additional, like a guide that is the age of your kids. It was a way for, I don't know. I don't remember what the holograms were for. But these kids were all hired as them, and for that they get to go to all these different parks pretty much for free. The thing was, at night, when they fall asleep, their bodies will be asleep, but then their minds wake up in these holograms at Disney. And that's when you find out that the Disney characters are all real. Characters like Maleficent, Chernabog, Ursula, Captain Hook. Yes, there's a lot of villains, but all these different characters were real. And it was their job to stop the evil at Disney, stop the corruption from these villains, and basically save the world.
That plot summary. Well, the way that you summarize that plot and seeing how it goes, it seems like we're experiencing that right now. Like,
yeah. Yeah, but we're also not holograms.
no.
Wait, hold on. No, not hologram. But that was the other weird thing about these holograms. It's at first that's all they were. They were holograms. They couldn't really interact. But as time went on, these holograms became more solid. And I think it was either the 5th or 6th book when they started trying to keep themselves awake for a long time because they realized that you get hurt as a hologram, you get hurt in real life.
The way that you talked about the holograms is like, oh yeah, this hologram is solid.
It also brings a whole new fear to It's a Small World. Because the setting is at the actual, or the settings are at the actual parks. And I believe there was a scary moment in the It's a Small World ride.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said, this is on there because it was something that my mom, my sister, and I were able to share. You know, we read the first series, and there was a second series that came out. I had the first book. Pretty sure they read all of the books. I kind of stopped at one because by the time I got to it, I was a little burnt out with it. But it is still a really good book series, especially for any Disney lovers.
Definitely. Okay, so this is another book that I read actually on that same car ride, but this was like the first one that came up before we got to But Not Buddy. This one was written in 1987 by Gary Paulson, and this is a very good one. It's especially good for teenagers, but it's good for anybody. But it's called The Hatchet. Hatchet is kind of similar to But Not Buddy, where like it focuses on a single protagonist, talking about some of the struggles that they go through in life and seeing how they have to survive. Unlike But Not Buddy, this one is a real survival novel.
If I remember correctly, there was a plane crash?
Yes, there was. So the summary is that the main character, this 13-year-old boy named Brian Robson, he's a 13-year-old boy, and he has divorced parents, and he's traveling from Hampton to the oil fields of northern Canada. And the reason being is because he travels back and forth between two parents since they've been divorced. But he's traveling on his own with a pilot on a plane, and the pilot suddenly has a heart attack. And they crash into this like lake in the middle of like this forest, which I believe is... He actually doesn't know where he's at, but my assumption is somewhere around Canada. But the pilot dies. The boy is able to escape, but now he's all alone. All of his belongings are gone, except for one thing. He has this hatchet that's given to him by his father, and that hatchet becomes the thing that he uses in order to survive in the wilderness. And really... a survival novel is the best description for the book because it is all about real survival tactics to use. Because not just the fact that he uses a hatchet for everything, but he also learns how to make shelter for himself, how to hunt food for himself. This is a very great book to make you realize like some of the stuff that you could prepare to survive on your own. I won't tell you how this book ends. Also, I did not realize it until I went through it, but like this is actually the first book in a series of 4 other books. I didn't realize it until I looked up like the plot summary online a couple days ago, and I was like, oh, this is great. Because I want to reread this book at some point, and I might go to the other books too. which pretty much follow the same character. But more than that, it also goes through like the struggles that he has to go through because again, he has divorced parents, and that's not easy for a kid his age to go through. And he has to go through the struggles with that, and he's really on his own. He doesn't have anybody. And as much as he tries to like signal to other people like, hey, I'm over here, it's hard for them to notice it. But yeah, The Hatchet is definitely a book that I recommend people to read. And again, I've only read the first book in this series, but like the first book is just such a strong hook, and like you don't even really need to read the other ones because like, you know, it has a pretty definitive ending in my opinion. But
yes,
I might read the other ones anyways just because I really like Hatchet. I think it's a very good realistic portrayal of survival.
So the funny thing about that, I read one of those sequels first before I read that book.
Oh.
That was a book that we read 7th grade in... And I'm just going to make up a name because, again, you know, I don't want to say the name and then everyone's like, oh, it's this person. I'm going to say Mr. Bookkeeper because one of his big things when I was there was because I loved reading. He would give me a bunch of books, but The Hatchet was one of the books that we read in his class. And, you know, so halfway through, I'm finding it really funny that out of the first 5 books for both of us, I have read 3 of your 5.
Nice.
I'm kind of curious if I've read more.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're moving to the top 5. And the top 5, number 5, I was actually split between 2 different books that have the same story.
Okay.
And I went with the one that's more recent and a little more relatable to me.
Okay.
So I went with The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery by Gabrielle Zevin.
Okay.
So basically, it is a Silas Marner type book. Silas Marner was about this guy who had this gold, lost it because he was being robbed, and instead finds a little girl and decides to take care of her. Same thing happens in this book, but it is a librarian who tends to keep to himself in this little island. And he has this book with him that is one of his most prized possessions. It is a very expensive book or not expensive, but it is a limited edition book that, if sold, can get a lot of money out of it. And one day, he goes and checks on it, and he finds that it's missing. And in its place, there's this little girl, maybe 2 years old. So he decides to take care of the girl instead. And it focuses on this lone person slowly going deeper and deeper into the community. You know, he owns a bookstore, so then he starts hosting a book club. You know, there's this reporter who comes to his island every so often, and he starts forming a relationship with her. And throughout this time, he is raising this little girl. And then, you know, the ending of the book is so sad. I don't want to spoil it. And I did find out recently that there was actually a movie released after this book with the guy who played Raj Koothrappali from The Big Bang Theory. I ended up watching that, and I thought it was pretty good. Like I said, I like the idea of the characters having a change of heart from being old curmudgeons or loners to now want to be invested in the community. And yes, this is hindsight for a later book, Take your guesses when we get to it.
Mm-hmm.
But my number 5 is The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery.
When you were saying like the limited edition book and how like it sells for like a lot of money, that reminded me of the first episode of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime where it's the Yugi's grandfather's Blue Eyes White Dragon and how it's priceless.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, it was a first edition book, and there were only 5 in existence.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Okay, so I talked about this, foreshadowed this already, but I actually have a first story as my not first story, short story as my number 5 book, and there's a very good reason why I have this on there, because most of the other books that we've talked about so far have been the fantasy driven or just historical fiction type of books. For me.
Oh, okay, for you.
For
I was
me.
going to say, I had a real event as one of my books.
Yeah. Well, actually, I do in later on in the list. But, and a lot of them were given to me or read to me by my mom. This one, however, I read in high school, and this one is one that my dad owns. And despite it being a short story, I finished it in one day because it's a very short book, but it's actually a very useful book. But it's called The Go-Getter by Peter B. Kine. And this is probably the oldest written book on the list because it was written in 1921. And this book is like a fiction story, and it is realistic fiction, but not in the death or gruesome sort of way, not in the war sort of way, but in a very everyday man sort of vibe. So basically what it is, in The Go-Getter, Bill Peck, a war veteran, persuades Cappy Ricks, the influential founder of the Ricks Logging and Lumbering Company, to let him prove himself by selling stunk wood in odd lengths, a job that everyone knows can only lead to failure. When Peck goes on to be his quota, Rick hands Peck the ultimate opportunity and the ultimate test, the quest for an elusive blue vase. Drawing on such classic values as honesty, determination, passion, and responsibility, Peck overcomes nearly insurmountable obstacles to find the vase and launch a career as a successful manager. Again, it's a short story, but it was very influential to me because this book teaches you, well, it teaches you how to be a good go-getter. That's the title of the book. But it teaches you how to take action in every opportunity that you can, even if it can lead to failure. To always take a chance, but to do it in a way that makes it morally right.
Right.
And despite the novel being from the 1920s, it has gone on to sell 500,000 copies sold worldwide, and most of those peoples have been entrepreneurs and businessmen learning to make a start of their own business. But I also think it's valuable for everyone. That like, even if you don't want to be like the CEO or the manager or the businessman sort of deal, this is a good book that learns how to have someone take action, and how to be a go-getter yourself, to learn to take the opportunity that no one else can take it, or to be the first to take that opportunity before someone else slacks off. You know, this is a book that is very honest and teaches you how to be that hardworking, honest person. And, you know, I've learned to try and carry that mentality all the way through my music career and just my career period. You know, I read this book when I got my first job. And again, it's is very influential. So I encourage you, for anyone, especially young adults and teenagers, that you're starting to get your job or trying to find your first job or just learning how to find that good or work ethic, read this book. I encourage you to read it because it doesn't take that long and you'll find some really good values in it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, go get her at number 5.
All right. And then we're moving on to my number 4. And I'm going to be honest, my number 4 is probably one of my most read books.
Mm-hmm.
And I know somewhere in my house I have a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't, I'm going to try and find a way to get a copy. So my number 4 book is called Freak the Mighty by Rodman Philbrick.
Mm-hmm.
Freak the Mighty focuses on these 2 kids. I don't remember who the main character's name is.
Mm-hmm.
I think I gotta look this up now.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main character's name was Freak the Mighty characters. So I have Max and Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
So Max is this bigger kid who, because of situations in his life, he hasn't really had the best upbringing. Mm-hmm. You know, he lives with his grandparents because his father's in jail and his mother's out of the picture. For a lack of a better term, he would be your ideal look for a bully. He's not a bully. Gotta point that out. So you've got Max, and then you have his neighbor named Kevin, who has a disorder where his heart is growing faster than his body. And this talks about, I think the entire book focuses on a full year. Because I remember part of it takes place in July, and I feel like part of it takes place at Christmas. Mm-hmm. But it focuses on this friendship between these 2 and how, you put them together. They're not Max and Kevin. They are called Freak the Mighty. Max is the brawn, Kevin's the brain. And it shows how deep a friendship can really go. It shows Kevin helping Max academically because Max struggles, and it shows how Max is helping Kevin physically with the things that Kevin can't do. Mm-hmm. It is another one of those tearjerker books, especially at the end. It is a very short book. I think there's only 10 or 11 chapters. Not even a big book, but it is one that will definitely tear your heart out.
Yeah. We are gonna get into some real tearjerkers. I guess we have been, at least for me, when it comes to some of the books that I picked out, because man, I guess I just really like realistic books. Now this one,
it's okay. Let it out.
Well, this one is going to be realistic because this is an actual story that took place. So I remember my, I think it was either 8th grade or freshman year of high school when I started doing the curriculum program. In fact, I've read a lot of these books do the curriculum program, like the Phantom Toll Booth, as I've already mentioned, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Hobbit, and a couple of other ones we're going to talk about. But I remember in that particular year, we also focused on some books that their stories took place during World War II. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those stories had to do with how they some families had to hide Jews away. Now, some of those books were fiction, This one, however, is not fiction, and it has to do with a family that hid Jews during World War II in Germany. And this book is called The Hiding Place, and it's an autobiography book by Corrie ten Boom and her family, the ten Boom family. So, to give you a little bit of a summary of like what takes place in the book. So it begins with the ten Boom family, and they're celebrating their 100th anniversary of their family business. So their father, Casper ten Boom, not that Casper, they sell and repair watches. And Corey works under that business. I forget which. So the town is it's a Dutch town of Haarlem, and there is a Jew that comes to approach them that recently just escaped from Germany, which is close by, and I'm trying to see the time period that it takes place in, because so this was probably early in the 1940s, so at the early and peak parts of like World War II, but their house becomes this hiding place for the Jews, and they almost get caught a couple of times, and I don't want to say that much about the book. One, because it's been a while since I've read this. Two is because I don't want to spoil it, and three, it is not a very easy story to read because this is real life. There are some real circumstances that come with it. I will tell you, Corrie ten Boom did live a long life after World War II. She actually moved to America at some point afterwards. I'm trying to see because, she passed away in 1983. She was born in 1892. So she lived a pretty long life, but her recounts of the story are just very heart-gripping. Like, they really give you a big picture as to what was happening during World War II, because it was a very scary time in Europe. I mean, sure, it was a scary time for everybody, like people that were involved in the war and probably people that were outside of America worrying about if they were the next ones getting targeted. But I don't think anyone got it worse than the people that were trying to escape their lives in Europe, especially for the countries that were very occupied by Germanic forces. Like Poland was probably like one example of like where there was heavy German occupation. I'm trying to think of other ones, but it was very bad. Also, it got a semi-sequel movie adaptation type thing that I've watched called Return of the Hiding Place. And it's pretty good. I recommend you watch it. But yeah, The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom is number 4, and it is a very heart-gripping story, and it's a very great historical account of the events that took place.
All right. So now we are on our top 3. And I am unfortunately saying that my third favorite book comes from my favorite author of all time. I am a big fan of Stephen King. I have always been a big fan of Stephen King. What was that for?
Stephen King,
Yep. He's, I love a lot of his, or a lot of the films that were adapted by his books. Just to recall from the film, my favorite book, or my favorite film is The Shawshank Redemption, which was based off of a short story that he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love Maximum Override, which was an original screenplay from him. Stand By Me is one that has a good place in my heart, and I'm currently reading the book that film is based off of. Book's called The Body. But for me, the one book for Stephen King that I wanted to choose, not really a well-known book, but it is a book called The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Ooh.
So, this story focuses on this girl who's going on the Appalachian Trail with her mother and I want to say younger brother. And because they're trying to walk the full thing, she needed to take a step out to use the restroom. Mother and brother left her behind, and just like the hatchet, it becomes a story of survival. She now has to use what she has to try to survive. Of course, it's Stephen King, so there is this monster that is chasing her as well. The one big thing that is keeping her alive is this little radio that she'll turn on to listen to her favorite baseball player named Tom Gordon. I'm not going to spoil how it ends, but it does end in a good way. Yeah, I don't just read books that end in tearjerkers. I actually read books that have pretty good endings. But this book is my favorite Stephen King book for 3 separate reasons. The first one is it takes sort of like a sidestep from how I normally picture Stephen King, which is like a scary author. You know, he writes those scary books. He wrote It. He wrote Tommyknockers. The supernatural, the horrors, all of those ones. This is sort of a sidestep because, yes, there is a scary creature, but the story itself focuses less on the scary creature and more about a little girl's survival. Second is because it was the first Stephen King book I have read front to back. And it was one of the books that made me love reading Stephen King. And Richard Bachman, for those of you who don't know, they're the same person, but not allowed to use both of them.
Yeah.
But the third reason is because Stephen King, not only is he one of my favorite authors, but he's also one of my grandmothers on my father's side of the family. He's one of her favorite authors. She and I bond over his books and the movies that come from her books. In fact, every year around Thanksgiving, we usually go to her house in Tennessee for Thanksgiving, and every year for the past couple of years, she and I would watch at least one Stephen King film. The last one we watched was Misery. I remember we once watched a movie called Cell. That was when she came to where I live instead of reverse. She and I watched The Shining and Dr. Sleep together. Like I said, Stephen King's one of the big connections I have with my grandmother on my father's side. And she is one of our frequent watchers. Hi, Grandma. She's a wonderful human being, and I'm proud to say that she got me interested in a wonderful author. So,
Yeah.
The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is number 3 on my list.
Alrighty. So, just to ask you this question. So, when you think of C.S. Lewis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Chronicles of Narnia.
As is the case for some people. Now, I'm not read everything of C.S. Lewis. I've read 2 of the first Chronicles of Narnia books, and I've even read like Out of the Silent Planet. But if I'm gonna be frank,
I thought you were Jake.
But just to be honest, like I'm not that big of a fan of his fantasy stuff.
Okay.
Like it's cool worlds, and for some cases it's well written, but it's very esoteric. Especially Out of the Silent Planet. I don't remember anything about Silent Planet just because of how esoteric that book is. And it's not even the fact that like they're complicated to read, because there's a difference between something that's hard to read and hard to understand. And for me, C.S. Lewis was kind of hard to understand through that. In fact, there is another book that we're going to be talking about that I think does a better job of, because like for those of you that do know or don't know, like, you know, C.S. Lewis is known as a Christian theologian. You know, he's known for writing stuff that's very Christian based, and the Chronicles of Narnia and even Out of the Silent Planet are no exception to this. But he doesn't always mix them in super well. What I do think he's very good at is when he is straight up talking about Christian theology. And that is the case with this book. But it is not the type of Christian theology that you would think. And if you think I'm talking about mere Christianity, no, I have not read that book yet. And I probably wouldn't even be talking about it here. No, I'm talking about a book that is in the perspective of demons. Like literal demons from hell. This is the Screwtape Letters. And so this is a book, but it consists of 31 letters that's written by a devil named Screwtape. And these are back and forth letters between Screwtape and his nephew named Wormwood, who, fun fact, is named after a star in the Book of Revelation. But it's not letters. You don't read the letters back and forth from each other. You exclusively read the letters that Screwtape reads to Wormwood, which you would think that, oh, there's stuff missing from Wormwood that you're not reading. No, because they basically give you some of that through his letters of like, okay, this is what's happening. So the basic plot, and I mean the basic, is Wormwood is trying to tempt his patient, basically this person from Earth, and he's trying to guide the patient towards hell, or as they call it, our Father below, which is Satan, and away from the enemy, which is God. I'm not going to spoil how it goes or how it goes at the end. But what I love about, well, there's a few reasons why I like this book. One is the fact that, like, it's in the perspective of the demons and how tempting they are. And they go through, like, all the worst types of sins where it's, like, lust and pride and gluttony and war, like, good. Well, not even just about the sins, but even just the concepts of them. The concept of love, the concept of gluttony and pride and war. And it isn't even about the fact that Wormwood is, like, tempting this patient, although the book is about that. But mainly it gives you the perspective of, like, how demons, devils can be dangerous, how they can easily tempt you, and yet how they can fail at their job sometimes, and that there is always a worse punishment for them because of that. I really do think that these are great letters for that perspective, because, like, you know, I read some Christian theology books through, like, magazines and even some, like, novels, and I like those books. I really do. But C.S. Lewis goes into uncharted territory by talking about a demon, a demon's perspective of tempting a person, and looking at that side. And I think he does it super well.
Right.
So yeah, if you're at all curious, pick up the Screw Tape Letters. I really do think it's some of C.S. Lewis's best work.
All right, so here's where the foreshadowing earlier comes in. Jake, do you like Christmas?
I love Christmas.
You love Christmas. Do you like time travel?
I like time travel when it's done well.
When it's done well. Okay. Do you like the idea of ghosts showing up in the middle of the night to wake you up just so that you can relive?
I know where this is going.
I know. I was trying to be subtle about it, but so my number 2 book is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
Oh man, you know what? I wanted to put some Charles Dickens books on this list. I mean, I mostly read abridged versions, but the only one that I've read unabridged is A Tale of Two Cities. But it barely made it into my top 10 because I don't remember that much about it besides the conflict.
So my thing about A Christmas Carol is it is the one story that every year I try to either watch or read once. Whether it's I find a way to get my hands on the book and physically read the book, or I watch one of the many depictions.
Muppets Christmas Carol, baby.
Best movie.
Marley and Marley.
Yep. No, but so for those of you who don't know about the story of A Christmas Carol, it focuses on this character named Ebenezer Scrooge.
Here comes Ebenezer Scrooge. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be having these songs stuck in my head now.
Yeah, but it focuses on this guy named Ebenezer Scrooge, who's on the older side, very grumpy, hates Christmas to a point where he says the words "bah humbug." At a certain point in his life, specifically Christmas Eve, he is met with the ghost of his old work partner named Jacob Marley, who tells him, hey, the path that we're going right now, it's not leading to the perfect place. He's got all these chains on him, and he's like, you see these chains? This is from what I've done. You've done a lot worse. Your chains are bigger. Your chains are longer. So to help you not get these chains, you're going to be visited by these 3 ghosts, past, present, and to come. And they're going to try to lead you to the right way. Which, by the way, I think it's really cool how it's not necessarily, okay, cool, just, you got to remember this. Like, because a lot of stories these days would be like, okay, remember this. Remember this event. Okay, now look around you. Look at everything that's going on around you. Okay, now think about where you are going. A Christmas Carol focuses more on, all right, I'm going to take you here to what you have forgotten. I'm going to show you what you cannot see going on in the world. And I'm going to show you where this path goes. Not have you think about it. I'm going to show you where this path goes. It is, I will forever say A Christmas Carol is one of my favorite depictions of time travel because of that. It's not necessarily a, cool, we're going to go back in time and change the future. No, it's, we're going to go back in time so you can look at your future. Or look at your past. And, you know, we've got the ghost of Christmas Present who goes back, shows Scrooge in his early days with his sister, with his love, with his old boss who he absolutely loved, and his heartbreak that sort of leads him into this bah humbug grumpy old man thing. We then go to the ghost of Christmas Present, which focuses on, okay, cool, we already know what you do, but what about the people who you know? We focus on his nephew who plays games with his friends that depicts Scrooge in a horrible light.
Mm-hmm.
We go to the house of his work associate, Bob Cratchit,
Mm-hmm.
who is so poor that that his family is excited about getting a Christmas bird about this big. Nothing filling at all for one person, much less a whole family. And this part focuses on Tiny Tim, who, kind of like Kevin from Freak the Mighty, has this ability that he won't be able to survive with the money that Bob Cratchit gets. Mm-hmm. And then we focus on the ghost of Christmas to Come, which looks a year in the future and shows just how dark and gloom it is, because Tiny Tim's passed away, so the Cratchit family's all upset. And then it shows all of these people happy about a death. And Scrooge realizes whose death it is. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say who it is. You could probably put the pieces together.
You basically spoiled most of the story right there.
Well, it's a really old story. It is, at this point, a tale as old as time. Mm-hmm. And again, you see a depiction of this just about every Christmas.
Yeah. I've not read A Christmas Carol on its own, but two things. One, I've never thought, despite the book being about time travel, I never really considered it as a time travel story. But
no one does until I bring it up.
Yeah, but that is a very fair point. The other thing too is, this is more having to do with Charles Dickens. I don't think most people don't give Charles Dickens enough credit, because he made some very great stories.
He did make a lot of really.
Well, because besides Tale of Two Cities and Christmas Carol, which are probably some of his more popular stories, there's also stuff like David Copperfield and Oliver Twist. Mm-hmm. Both of which are kind of like a similar story to each other, but they go on kind of different. Right. But yeah, I really like Charles Dickens stuff, hence why I want to reread Tale of Two Cities, and maybe I'll read A Christmas Carol. Yeah,
I would highly recommend it. And like I said, it is, because of how good of a story it is, his story has been depicted so much in media. Mm-hmm. And everyone has their own spin on it. Mm-hmm. You've got the Bill Murray movie Scrooge, which focuses less on an old businessman, but focuses more on a present, or maybe more middle-aged man trying to sort things out with his business. You've got A Christmas Carol, which came out, I think, 3 years ago now, which focuses on, a grumpy old woman who, for lack of a better term, is a Karen. And of course, you got the best one, which is the Muppets one. Second best being the animated one on Netflix that's a musical. That one I like because it's really heartfelt. But each one has its own different depiction of past, present, and future, but it tells the same general story.
Yeah.
But number 2 for me, Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
All right. So, we've gone through some very deep and even complex books, a lot of which are kind of grounded in realism. This next one is a fantasy. And you might be thinking, what could be deeper or complicated than, the Screwtape Letters, or The Hiding Place, or Saga of the Forgotten Warrior? Well,
it's a birth.
But I think once you read even the first book, I think you'd be surprised with the amount of depth that it has. Now, although I'm counting the one book, I'm also counting the 3 other books that go along with it, except I've not read the 3rd book in this trilogy yet. And shocker, it is The Hobbit, and also the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned before how C.S. Lewis, he's good at depicting Christian theology by putting it straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
J.R.R. Tolkien is like that, but with fantasy. But it's not that straightforward.
Right.
He does a better job integrating that theology into his writing. But that's not the reason why. Well, that's not the only reason why he's high up there. One, he is a very good writer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even some of the stuff that's hard to read just hooks you. Mm-hmm. Like, every word that he writes down just like hooks you and engages in you. And talking about The Hobbit, most of the story was written up when he was in World War One, and he crafted this world with this friend that ended up passing away. So, and he crafted like all of Middle Earth and its lore and its characters along with it while he was in the war. And The Hobbit is great because, and the same case goes for Lord of the Rings too. Like, both of those books take place during a war. Mm-hmm. And the thing to realize about J.R.R. Tolkien is that he does not like war whatsoever. And this is something that the Hobbit movies in particular have failed at that. Because they focus so much on the fights and the war and not the aspects that make The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings great. The Hobbit is great because, like, The Hobbit is, like, for anyone that wants to get into Tolkien's writing, I recommend The Hobbit as the first book. Not because it is the prequel to Lord of the Rings, and it is a literal prequel to The Lord of the Rings. Like, it was written first, and then The Lord of the Rings came, like, I can't remember if it was, like, 20 years later or something. It took a while for it to come out. But The Hobbit is basically like children's stories because it follows the tales and adventures of Bilbo. Like, this is a tale of how Bilbo encounters Gandalf. This is a tale of Bilbo and the dwarves eating at Bilbo's house. This is the tale of Bilbo and the dwarves walking into the Misty Mountains. Mm-hmm. Also, the other aspect about this book too, he has such great poems. He writes all sorts of poems all throughout the books that, like, on their own are really good, but when they're integrated into the story, they're even better. Mm-hmm. But it's just a world, a fantasy world that's just fully realized, and a lot of people have, like, really appreciated those aspects. Like, in a lot of those books, they have the map of Middle Earth. Mm-hmm. And it's fully realized. There's all these different characters and all these towns that take place. Yeah. And like, I finished 2 of the Lord of the Rings books. I plan on making my way to Return of the King. But I think Tolkien is, like, really worth your time to get into, like, the weeds of it, especially for people that have only experienced the movies. And the Lord of the Rings movies are pretty good on their own merit, but controversial take, I think the books are kind of better. A little bit.
Yep. As someone who has read all of the books, I would agree. Alright, so now we're at the number 1 spot. Mm-hmm. And I gotta go with this big, in-depth description beforehand because I'm all about flair. So for me, I love detective novels. I like the scary stories. I like real-world things. But the stories that captivate me the most are sci-fi or, like, science fiction stories. I didn't really have a lot of those in here other than The Andromeda Strain, and I can make an argument for Kingdom Keepers. And I was trying to think of a good sci-fi book to put on here. I was debating on Ready Player One because that's a great book, but you know, I feel like the movie for me kind of set the bar a little lower. But I could have gone that. I could have gone with the book The Martian about a guy stranded in Mars. That was a great book for me. But for me, I want to go all the way to the beginning of the sci-fi genre. Focus on a book about taking science a little too far and not understanding where the science will go. So for my number one entry, and not a lot of people will see this fully as science fiction until you think about it in depth, but I'm going to go with Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. Not only is it, just like I said, focusing on a scientific standpoint where you're a scientist named Victor Frankenstein basically brings to life a human from the dead, but then he doesn't know what to do with it. It brings up this idea of we're testing things with science, but we don't know what's going to come after that. We don't know how it's going to impact. And after he brings to life this creature, who I think in the book was called Adam, by the way.
That sounds like Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Mm-hmm. But he brings to life this creature and then runs away in fear. So then this creature then has to learn through its own experiences to live, to talk, to interact. It is a great story focusing on nature versus nurture, where if Victor Frankenstein had focused more on nurturing his creation instead of running away, the creature wouldn't be seen as much as, or to the extent of a monster. And a large chunk of the book focuses on that whole nature versus nurture aspect. It focuses on who's the main villain of the story. Is the main villain Adam, the monster? Or is it Victor Frankenstein? In fact, who is the monster? Is the monster the creator or the creation?
Or is it you?
Monster's definitely me.
I wasn't pointing at you.
It looked like you were pointing at me, but whatever. But the other cool part about Frankenstein to me is it's not just a story. It is a story told from Victor to a sailor. And that sailor's writing the story to send to his wife. It is a very, very thought-provoking book. And it is funny that this came up because of a drinking game. Maybe not a drinking game, but there was a little challenge that Mary Shelley, her husband Percy, and then two of their friends had about coming up with the best scary story. And not only did Mary Shelley win with that, but she became, in my opinion, the mother of science fiction. Because this is, to my knowledge, the first science fiction story. Because of this, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is my number one book.
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of funny that you have a female author on your list, because my number one book certainly has a female author. So I was exposed to this book, again, due to my mom. This book, actually, no, this is a series of books. But this is a very interesting series, unlike all the other ones that kind of follow in chronological order. This one is, I consider it more of an anthology series, because while it does feature some of the same characters, at least the first 3 books do, they each focus on a specific protagonist and they occur at a different location. But this book series by Rosie Bossy, and yes, that is how you pronounce that last name, it is called Home on the Range. This is the first book, North to Cheyenne and the Long Road Home. So to give you some context of who Rosie Bossy is, she lives on a ranch in northeast Kansas, and she mainly writes children's books. And that was her first foray into the world of novels. And she likes to write stuff that draws people in. But she also thinks the mark of a good book is when you can't put it down. This is the case with this book series. You can't put it down. I'm mainly going to be summarizing the first book, but basically it is of May of 1868. So a lot of the book series takes place after the Civil War. And Molly is on a riverboat headed for St. Louis alone, frightened, and pregnant. The young woman has no idea how she is going to support her baby. Molly's father thinks she is going to New Orleans to give the baby away, but Molly didn't stop in New Orleans. When she rushed out of the train station, she bought passage onto the first boat she came to. Lance Rankin is a young cowboy headed back home to Cheyenne. He has been away for 8 long months and is anxious to return home. The family plantation in Georgia has been sold, and Lance now has the money to buy the ranch he wants. He didn't see the young woman come out onto the deck, but he sees her now. Her back is pressed against the railing, and her eyes are wide with terror as 2 rough men approach her. And that's basically the introductory sequence without getting into spoilers and such. Mm-hmm. So, I mentioned before how I like books that are kind of grounded in realism. So, although these books are fiction, there is still a lot of realism to them. In fact, a lot of these occur in real locations, which the author provides in the prologues that she writes of like the locations that happen in the books and some of the events that take place as well. So it's pretty accurate historical fiction. Mm-hmm. So there's this Western vibe to it, this very out on the run sort of deal, because there are cowboys featured all over the book, and ranches and horses and all that good stuff. But the reason I like this book series is because of the characters that it follows. And these type of characters are very grounded, very real, and go through real problems that, even though this occurs in like the 1860s, these are issues that we still come face to face with today. And to me, and actually I want to compare it to another anthology series, which is a video game series, Dragon Quest. And I compare it because Dragon Quest talks about the meaning of family and what it means to be a family. This book series focuses a lot on that, of what it means to have a family, and how, in fact, in the first book and in other books too, a lot of these families that you come across are not blood related in a lot of different ways, and come through very unfortunate circumstances. And the responsibilities that take place because of that. A lot of the male protagonists that are being followed are people that have gone through like hardships through their own families, and the women that they come across also go through different hardships, and how together they're able to understand each other and form unexpected families because of that. Mm-hmm. And how sometimes there is a very moral choice in the matter that is good for the sake of keeping people safe and keeping them together in the best ways possible. It goes through different forms of abuse towards different characters. It goes through different forms of like unexpected family relations that aren't necessarily blood related. And this is the one book series out of any other books that I've read to make me cry, because there is a lot of death, unexpected deaths in this book. Well, okay, maybe not as much as like Forgotten Warrior where it's gruesome, but like the kind of deaths where like you get so attached to a character that you only know from one chapter, and all of a sudden they're dead.
Yeah.
Just like that, they're dead. And not usually, like, it could be from like a rock slide. It could be because of an accident on a horse. It could be from a shootout or something. This book series learns to go through the consequences of what happens when we go through those hardships and those circumstances. And hence why it is the number one book series for me. And if you're at all curious, pick up the first book and see what you think. And personally for me, I really like the third and fourth books because they follow characters that I can deeply relate to. And you go through like different protagonists too, from the male and the female side of things. But yeah, Rosie Bossy, she really knows how to get you hooked, line, and sinker. So yeah, so Home on the Range is my number one favorite book series. Yeah. And that's it. Yep. Those are our top 10 favorite books. Yeah, so we ended up having very completely different lists at the end.
We did. Although there were a couple of books on your list that I was debating on putting on mine.
Yeah. I love reading. I still continue to read. And there are other books that I want to get to one of these days. Like, I'm thinking of picking up the Odyssey. Well, actually, I do have the Odyssey. I just need to actually finally read it. There's some books that I want to reread, like Phantom Tollbooth and Dickens stuff, and even some of the stuff that I haven't mentioned, like Call of the Wild by Jack London. That is a great book and a horrible movie.
That is, yep.
Yeah, or Journey to the West is one that I want to really pick up. It's a Chinese novel.
All right.
It's a very, very inspired, fantastical novel. But I plan on picking that up because, like, one of the best ways I think to get your brain engaged and to really get better communication skills, well, through conversations.
Yes.
But the second best thing that you could do is to pick up a book that you enjoy and read. And like one of the reasons I find that some people don't like to read is because they're usually forced to read stuff that they don't like. And I've gone through that through school where like there's some stuff that I did not really want to read, but I had to.
Right.
But I've been able to come across stuff that I've been able to really enjoy, and there's not really a specific taste for me. I mostly read fiction, but like I love reading autobiographies. There's autobiographies I haven't talked about, like of jazz musicians that I've read.
Right.
So, yeah. So, go touch grass and go pick up books.
You're ending it with touching grass.
And picking up books.
All right.
There's nothing like reading a book outside.
No, there's nothing like reading a book. Which, after going through this list, I gotta find some of those books again because I especially want to reread Frankenstein. I want to reread A Christmas Carol because it's almost time for that, and I want to reread that Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon book. But with that, I think that's all for us for this week.
Yeah.
So, I'm Xavier Dean.
And I'm Jacob Green.
We'll see you next week with another episode. We'll see you there.